All right, why don't we start in now?
Okay.
I'm going to welcome everyone and thank you for joining the first ever Global Swimway Marathon webinar. I'm Josh Roy, conservation scientist for the Nature Conservancy in the state of Maine, and also for Global Freshwater Conservation and Restoration. I'm also one of the co-founders of and on the advisory board of the World Fish Migration Day and Foundation, and I'll be your moderator for the North America portion of this remarkable 24-hour marathon swimway webinar. So this started for me and many people maybe on this call, and certainly for the organizers 24 hours ago almost, with incredible presentations in opening up the day in New Zealand. And then the presentations continued throughout the day through West, South, and Eastern Asia, where I went to bed for a little bit. So sorry, Asia, but I think Ariane and much of the team were up this entire time. And when I woke up early this morning, I had some incredible presentations from Africa and then Europe this morning. Those were followed by South and Central America. And now here we are for the North America presentation. So during the session, we'll start with an overview of the northern part of the continent, from culture and history to rivers, some of the largest impoundments and dams to some of the smallest headwaters, and programs that bring communities together all around the continent to restore rivers. And if you missed talks along the way, know that the global webinar team is recording this, and those links will be found on the World Fish Migration Day website, www.worldfishmigrationday. Before we start, if you are in view and listen mode only, so you can't speak up, I'm sorry, but you can click the bottom of the screen. You can see those icons for the chat room and for the questions and answers. And Molly Payne-Wynn and Hannah Christensen will be monitoring those buttons and look for your comments. Please enter your comments during the presentation so that Hannah and Molly can sum them up and we can have questions presented at the end. Note that you can like a question along the way and it will elevate it in the queue. So if a lot of people all have the same question, don't keep rewriting it, just click like and that will elevate it there. So now with the housekeeping done, I am thrilled to be able to introduce the thoroughly exhausted and invigorated and hopefully very proud Ariane Berkhausen. Ariane is the managing director for the World Fish Migration Foundation, the organization organizing this webinar, and he'll give a 10-minute introduction to each, and he'll give an introduction to the whole session about global swimways. He's also been a host for the last 22 hours. So welcome back from South and Central America, an incredibly rich series of speakers and topics, Ariane, and how are you holding out?
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey, I have to say. Really, really good. And it's the first time that I do 24-hour marathon webinar, and it goes better than I thought it would. But that's probably because of the good talks, Josh. So it's really been really nice. Maybe it's also nice, what I like to do at the beginning of the sessions, to have a little bit of an idea of the people we are talking to. So we made a little poll, and I'd like to start that one also for you, because just to get an idea of who is sitting there behind the screen that we are talking to. You can click on the different answers of the different questions. There are 3 questions, and then submit. And I'll wait until, well, enough people have been voting. Then we have a bit of an idea of the audience that we are talking to. Now, currently people are voting. 50 people of the 170 at the moment. 60, 65. So yeah. So okay. We already have a good idea. I hope you are not offended that I end the polling now. Yes, there we go. And I will share the results. So, first question is like, what do you specifically like? Are you really into fish, or are you more into rivers, or in nature, or both? And it's very clear, people listening now, looking now, they're really into all of the above, as a whole package, so to say. The majority of people has a background as scientists, quite a few students as well. From the NGO sector, we have people, business as well, other, it says here, I followed more sessions today. Yes, quite a few people have followed more sessions today, so that's really nice to hear. Okay, thank you very much. That was really good to know. Now, let me first introduce myself a little bit and the team especially. So I'm indeed the director of the World Fish Migration Foundation. We have a photo here of our team in France, not so very long ago. There was it's the largest dam removal actually that took place in Europe, because this dam is not there anymore. It was almost 100 years old and now taken out. Impressive project, really fantastic. Nature is restoring itself incredibly quickly at the moment. And in the end, salmon should be returning there. Anyway, so this team is like this is the core team, but we have a lot of people helping us, volunteers and supporting us. For example, Jocelyn is also in our advisory board. And so a lot of people who with a heart and a passion for this subject are cooperating together, which makes it really, really nice organization. The idea for this webinar was done like maybe a month ago, something like that, when Herman woke up and thought, hey, why don't we do a webinar for 24 hours so that each time we can have sessions at the different time zones. So we are going to you, so to say, instead of having one where it's really difficult to have everybody together. And that's what we want. We want to have the people together somehow. So we started with it. We said, hey, nice idea, let's do it, and let's work on it. Then we realized it's quite a complex issue. At certain stages was like, oh, is this going well? But now we're really happy that we're doing this experiment, because it shows that there's so much to share, and it shows that there's also so much in common, but also so much to learn. Anyway, so let me first tell a little bit more about the World Fish Migration Foundation, for those who don't know us. We started 6 years ago with the first World Fish Migration Day. The idea is also to bring the community together and celebrate migratory fish, to connect people with rivers and with fish. And it was quite a success already on the first time, where more than 270 events were held all over the world in more than 15 countries. And after that, we started working on projects. For example, developed the concept of Happy Fish, which is about projects which really are good for migratory fish. In 2016, we organized the second World Fish Migration Day, and it was also the year where we launched European dam removal. We were inspired by the USA dam removal activities, and we started that also for Europe. We also started we were getting really much involved in the Amber project. That's a project in Europe which is identifying where all the barriers all over European rivers are, and trying to find solutions how to improve that in a proper way. And in 2018, we had a third World Fish Migration Day. Again, it was bigger than the last time. It's growing each time. And we launched also the From Sea to Source guide, the second one, a guide about good practices for fish migration solutions. And now we are starting a Global Swimways project, and I hope that you will also participate in that, and we can do that together. In October, we will do the World Fish Migration Day. Initially, we wanted to have it on the 16th of May, but because of the COVID situation, it will be later. We will be publishing a report. I'll tell a little bit more about that later. And we hope in 2030 we can celebrate a river opening every day. And in this work in the past years, the number of contacts we have really has been growing. Like we have now 10,000 contacts all over the world where we know that people are there also passionate about this subject and eager to cooperate and to do something about it, to make a change. That makes it incredibly powerful. And that's really necessary because if you look at the statistics, it's not going well with migratory fish on global level. Currently, we are working on a Living Planet index, a new one. That is an index which shows how it's going with migratory fish. And it's been in a decline. I can already tell you the new one is going to be really bad. So it's really, really going down with migratory fish. So we have to do something about it. And then we thought, well, let's learn from others who are doing already good stuff, protecting the nature. And then we looked at the flyways. That's a concept being used to protect migratory birds. And it started in the United States, protecting waterfalls. And there were scientists at the time were following the birds and contacting the different people who are able to gather information, and together they got the overview and developed the principle of flyways. And as a consequence, along the flyway, they started cooperating to protect important spots. That has in the end led to the Ramsar Convention, which is held in 1971, and that was a start for protecting wetlands all over the world. Very inspirational. And now there are even summits for flyways, where UN and countries cooperate together, looking for solutions for migratory birds. And we think that we should have something like that as well. So what can we learn from flyways? Well, from the start they had a good knowledge basis. Scientists are really looking into what are the flyways, where are they, how is it going, all along the routes. And that has made it really powerful. It's really, there's a lot based on facts. That is what we want to like to do as well. So we have been drawing a first concept a few years ago of swimways around the world. That was really, really nice. But now we have to go a bit deeper, a bit more, well, let's say academic. Luckily, the Cambridge Conservation Initiative supported us. We now cooperate with IUCN and UNEP and the University of Cambridge to kickstart that process. So with them, we're going to make a first map of the global swimways. And luckily, we have already support from Nature Conservancy, WWF, University of Groningen. All these organizations are willing to cooperate and make it strong, or at least have a good start, because this is the first draft that we made. So this is really recent, and let me tell you, this is not finished. It's not there yet. What it shows is the global swimways based on criteria of those routes where you have most, which is used most by migratory species and threatened migratory freshwater species. So this has to be optimized, and that we need to do that together. And there are different databases we have noticed all over the world, especially today also, you know. Many people have their own databases. Let's cooperate and make this global picture. That can be really useful, and I'd like to make the use the example of the European eel. As you might know, European eel is born also in the Sargasso Sea, like many other eels. A lot of them flow with the current to Europe, and there they find their way into rivers and to go inland, so to say. And when they're really big, they can go back. During that route, there are all kinds of threats. For example, close to the coast, when they arrive in Europe, a fair chance they are taken out by fishing nets, and they end up in the stomachs of Dutch or Spanish or Chinese people. But the ones who are more lucky to go on, And for example, they become adults in Germany or the Netherlands. When they decide to go back, they risk to be chopped into pieces when they have to pass pumping stations. So there are all different risks at all along the route of these swimways. The nice thing about this, why am I telling this, is that now there's really an official cooperation in Europe to protect the European eel. So countries like Spain and the Netherlands are cooperating, all taking different measures to make sure that the European eel is going to survive. You need to do it together. Now, that is what we want for a lot more swimways. And that it's also really giving a nice energy. We just had a talk and somebody was talking about conservation optimism. Now, this is a picture of 10 years ago where we experienced a moment of conservation optimism. We were looking at this dam. It's in the Netherlands. It's Afsluitdijk, a 32 kilometers long dam, which divides seawater from fresh water. And it's really a burden for migratory fish. Very, very large barrier. And we decided, let's make a hole in that dam. Now, that is not really easy in the Netherlands. So it was quite a project where we had to avoid that salt water was coming into the fresh water and it would be safe. And so it became a really large project. In the end, it cost 50 million euro. And still we are able to do it. It's going to be built, the fish migration river. And I really learned that if you really cooperate with a group of enthusiastic people and you have a clear target, a clear goal, you can do it. You have to go for it. Very inspiring. That same energy we can feel now within our Dam Removal Europe project. Several organizations, individuals also within these organizations who are quite enthusiastic and eager to scale up the movement of dam removals. It's already a little bit happening here and there, as I showed in France, and it's happening, but not as far as we want to. It really has to scale up. In an earlier session, somebody, Carlos Garcia de Leonis was talking about in Europe there are almost 1 million barriers and around 150,000 of these barriers are obsolete. There's a huge, huge task lying ahead of us. And we need to do that together and scale it up into a movement. And that is really nice to see how that is going. For example, this is one of the colleagues from Dam Removal Europe. He's in Finland. And he just released this Donald Duck from Disney in Finland about dam removals. I thought the American people watching now must appreciate this. And also in the Netherlands, everywhere, we all read, well, in my country, we all read Donald Duck when we were young. And this is so inspiring. This morning, we had a presentation of Dr. Jo in Korea, South Korea, who was also talking about huge dam removal projects in South Korea. It's really incredible what's happening there. We had Julie talking about protecting mahseer in places like Bhutan, Nepal, and Thailand, and involving fly fishermen people to help with that. And we had somebody from Australia telling about how to deal with droughts and keeping rivers accessible for migratory fish with more natural solutions. We had an indigenous tribe person telling about how people from that culture are involved in protecting the eels in that situation. We had Derek from India, who is an angler and goes out and has all kinds of programs to educate children on the importance of migratory fish. Lee Baumgartner from Australia about the concept of integrated solutions, which is really taking off there now. And yeah, this one was also quite unexpected for me, that in South Africa, there's a project where they're protecting migratory fish. And somehow in order to involve the landowners to cooperate, the wine plays a very important role. Not exactly sure how that works, but I find that an interesting concept. And here in Europe, I was talking about that, where we are going to look for the obsolete barriers. And in South America, where they're looking at all reasons, different reasons why the free-flowing rivers in South America should be kept free-flowing. And somebody from Honduras who is able to make sure that all the research results actually end up in management plans of governments. So there's so many good examples that we can learn from each other, that we can inspire each other. And that's why we have this webinar. We want to learn from each other, and we have to look for interesting people, we think interesting talks all over the world, which can together make a difference for migratory fish, to make the world a better place for migratory fish, in the end, also for ourselves. Okay, can I give then the word back to you, Josh?
Yes, thank you, Arjan. That was fantastic. And it's wonderful to see how your summary grows over the course of the day. We're a little short on time, so we'll jump right into the next speaker, which is Steve Cook. If you can grab controls of the screen. Steve Cook is professor of environmental science at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. He is the president of the International Fisheries Section of the American Fisheries Society and is enthusiastic about all migratory animals. He is this being a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographic Society and is also the secretary of the Royal Society of Canada. The status and trends of migratory fish and barriers across North America. Steve Cook, thank you.
Thanks very much, Joshua. Hi, folks. How you doing? I'm sure there's lots of friendly faces out there. I wish I could see them all, but not possible. I hope everybody's staying well. My task today is to introduce you to the idea of the status here in Canada and the United States. This is not North America. We're not including Mexico. This is focused just solely on Canada and the US. I want to remind everybody that it's not just fish that are facing issues when we talk about migratory organisms. If you're looking for a good read, David Wilcove's book, which is pictured off to the right, is certainly worthwhile, where he does a really good job describing the plight of migratory birds, of the caribou, of the whales. So this isn't an issue that's restricted to freshwater fish or diadromous fish. In fact, if anything, fish have been forgotten, and that's why I'm so thankful to the folks at the World Fish Migration Foundation for putting fish on the map and getting people thinking about them. One of the issues that's inherent with a migration is that it involves transition between multiple habitat types. So if there's 5 different habitats that an organism needs to complete its life cycle, if you take one of them away, that's a problem. So that could be via barriers or habitat alteration. And then there's also this fact that migrations are repeatable. And so as humans, we're able to figure that out and we exploit that. It allows these animals to be vulnerable to hook and net and other things and other disturbances along the way. So, and that's led to papers such as this one by Wilkove and Wakelski, where they consider whether or not animal migration is disappearing. And it's certainly something that I don't want to see happen in my lifetime or ever. And that's why we're all here today. So obviously this presentation and this session is on migratory fish. And when I think of migratory fish, the first thing that comes to mind is a nice free-flowing river. However, we know that many rivers today are not free-flowing. They're influenced by humans in many ways. If we look at dam numbers alone, in the US, or in Canada, we're somewhere around 15,000 dams. In the US, over 84,000. Those are probably underestimates because there's all sorts of tiny barriers that occur in private lands and in the depths of forests and farmers' fields that are not well characterized. So when people do more detailed analyses and actually get out in the field. There's more than that. So the point being that there's lots of challenges for fish as they're trying to get from A to B. On top of that, we know that by 2050, we'll see a 55% increase in demand for fresh water for use in household consumption and industrial processes. So there's going to be more demand for water. On top of that, we're going to see a 60% increase in the need for food and food products. And as many of you know, water is pretty foundational to most of the crops that we depend on and traditional livestock agriculture. And then of course, we're going to see an 80% increase in electricity demand, and much of that is going to be fueled by hydropower. So that means more dam development or redevelopment processes. So that's sort of the state of affairs in the background. On top of that, there's a few other things happening. Whenever we talk about fresh water, it's not one threat, it's many threats. And they're all visualized on the screen here. You can work your way around. And some of them are threats that have been around for a long time, and others are emerging threats, whether they be emerging contaminants, microplastic pollution, light and noise, and so on. So it's not just the fact that there are physical barriers that exist and that can limit migration. There are all these other challenges in place. This figure comes from Andrea Reed's paper in Biological Reviews, published in 2019, which reviews the threats to freshwater biodiversity on a global basis. In terms of where things are at in Canada and the US, we can lean on some great work that's been done by Emily Dean and Dana Infante from Michigan State University. They've established what they're calling the North American Freshwater Migratory Fish Database. They've got 1,215 freshwater fish species in their database. Of those fish, 28% are considered to be migratory, 50% are non-migratory, and 22% lack sufficient data to be able to describe their pattern. However, you've noticed that I've got a couple asterisks beside this 50% are non-migratory. I think it really depends on definition. When we start thinking about migratory fish, it's really easy to think about the fish that migrate hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers. And we forget that smaller fish that live in smaller systems also undertake migrations that are more localized. We oftentimes don't call them migrations, but in many ways they are. And one of the best examples comes from the salmonids. They, in fact, you can take a sockeye salmon and break down their migrations over the course of their life into 7 or 8 different phases. And the first migration actually involves them swimming all of about 30 centimeters, where the elven have to make their way from the gravel to the water surface to fill their swim bladder. And if they fail to do that, they're dead. And so that is actually a migratory phase, 30 centimeters, okay? There are lots of other fish that undertake migrations on smaller scales or scales of that magnitude that are relevant to consider as well. So just because 50% of the fish have been deemed to be non-migratory, that doesn't mean that they aren't moving between discrete habitats. And if you want, you can dig into the literature. There's all sorts of debate and discourse about what migration is, but I would argue that almost all freshwater fish migrate. I want to share a few numbers here. Take something like the American eel. Used to be plentiful within the Laurentian Great Lakes, and I'm showing the number there, 4%. If this was an audience where I could be a little bit more interactive, I would ask you what you think that number is. Well, 4% is the current population status relative to what it was historically. So we've essentially seen massive 96% decline in the number of fish of these American eel that are making their way through the St. Lawrence River, which is truly problematic. We can take sockeye salmon, and I've got a year visualized here, 2009. That was the year in the Fraser River where the returns were so low that the Prime Minister called for an inquiry. Things and arising from that was, no smoking gun. It was all sorts of things. It were the kinds of threats that I identified in the previous summary slide. On top of that, there are other challenges. So this past year, there was a rock slide on the Fraser River in British Columbia, the largest salmon producing river in Canada. And I've got a number there, half. That's the amount of watershed that's currently inaccessible to migratory salmonids. So very problematic. They're currently trying to use all sorts of creative ways to get fish past, including the so-called fish cannon. Last year, they were moving fish by helicopter. But the point being that Mother Nature throws lots of slides. And I'm seeing Joshua. How much time do I have, Joshua?
About a half minute, Steve. Thank you.
Half a minute. Okay. I also want to note that sometimes we use barriers very intentionally. So sea lamprey are an invasive species in the Great Lakes, and barriers are actually used to restrict migration. So whenever we talk about migratory fish, it's not easy. They're complex organisms, and humans are complex as well. And we have complex relationships with these animals, but also with the rivers and with dams, with barriers, whether it be for recreation, whether it be to preserve fisheries, protect them from invasive species, and so on. So I look forward to hearing the case studies that we'll see over the coming hour or two as other speakers dig in more depth.
Wonderful, Steve. Thank you. I love the large scale overview, which shows in some ways how our knowledge and our success at restoring fish is sort of like us swimming upstream in the currents just a little bit too strong for us right now. But also redefining the very concept of migration, that it's not just the massive iconic migrations of thousands of miles. It's some very small, super critical, important migrations that get fish to the different habitats they need at different life stages, which is all the more important now that the planet is becoming that much more extreme. So I'll ask you to stop sharing your screen, and if we can bring up Eric McMillan. Eric works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Aquatic Conservation Program at their headquarters office in Northern Virginia. He and his staff work with partners across the country to conserve aquatic species and their habitats. He previously worked for NOAA Fisheries on protected species and habitat conservation issues. So Eric, if you can start sharing your screen. Beautiful, looks like it's lit up, and take it away, Eric, thank you.
Right,
And
so
remember,
you can hear me, Josh?
Folks, if you want to write your questions in the chat, then Hannah and Molly will be able to, we can report those out later. I won't dig into your time anymore, Eric. Thank you.
No problem. So you can hear me, Josh?
Just fine. Thanks.
All right, great. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to talk about National Fish Passage Program through the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's a program where we work with partners on the issues that we've heard so much about over the last multiple hours. So through the Services Fish Passage Program, we focus solely on watershed restoration and conservation through actions that restore or maintain fish passage and connectivity. I don't think I need to go too much into the importance of that for fish conservation. Steve just gave an overview, and then we've had a number of hours of more information, and it hopefully has hit home by this point. This image is, and hopefully you guys can see this video here, but it's just a great illustration of the basic problem we're trying to solve. This is a culvert associated with a road stream crossing on Kodiak Island in Alaska. And as it stands here, this is really the end of the line for the salmon. It's not going to be able to migrate upstream to reach spawning habitat to reproduce. It just can't make it past this culvert. You know, it could migrate downstream a little bit and find a suitable habitat, or it might not. And so through the Fish Passage Program, we try and remedy those issues. The program operates as a cooperative conservation program, where biologists with the Fish and Wildlife Service and engineers as well work with partners to restore fish passage and connectivity across the United States. Our biologists provide technical expertise in biology, engineering, environmental compliance, and then also a lot of coordination support to bring diverse partners together to get good work done on the ground. And then we're also providing financial support to to get work done on the ground. Can work with any willing partner, whether it's other federal agencies, states, local municipalities, NGOs, private landowners. There's just a lot of flexibility to target, where the greatest conservation need is from a fish passage and aquatic connectivity perspective. It's a voluntary, non-regulatory program, so it's proactive conservation. We're not the regulatory branch of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And another thing to highlight is that the program kind of tries to take a holistic view of watershed restoration and connectivity, as that we can participate with partners in assessments, so prioritizing barriers for removal within a watershed, monitoring effectiveness, design, project implementation from headwaters to the sea. So it's a pretty flexible program, which allows us to do some pretty good stuff with partners. So I've mentioned partners several times. We really couldn't do this work without others. Some of the partners we work with are here. I was a little bit hesitant to put this slide up, just, there's to single out a few, but just some of the major players that we have here really runs the gamut. It's local NGOs, it's state level NGOs, it's national NGOs, other federal agencies, states, tribes, private landowners, municipalities, all are involved, and we work with anyone who's willing to work with us on good projects. We have a lot of experience doing this work since 1999. This program has worked with over 2,000 partners to remove or bypass over 3,000 barriers to fish passage in the US. So some good numbers there, and seeing some good results on the ground. It's reopened over 55,000 miles of aquatic habitat to fish and other aquatic organisms across the US. So with the next few slides, I'm just going to go into some of the types of projects that we work on. Steve in the previous presentation talked about dams and how many dams there are across the US. I think it was 84,000. And that's one of kind of our bread and butter types of projects. We definitely participate in a lot of dam removals. And these are typically dams that have exceeded their operational lifespan and are no longer used. Here are just a couple of examples. The top one is the Bloody Dam outside of Baltimore in the state of Maryland. It was originally a hydroelectric dam, but hasn't served a functional purpose in a number of decades. And just one of the many projects that exemplifies all the partners that must come to the table to get some of this work done at times. So the Fish and Wildlife Service was certainly involved from a technical and financial assistance perspective, but so were a lot of others. The state of Maryland played a huge role. NOAA Fisheries, Coca-Cola Foundation, American Rivers was also a big player, among others. Just another thing to highlight is the types of dam removals that we participate in really runs the gamut. So you got large-scale hydropower dams, such as this picture on the bottom here below is the VZ Dam on the Penobscot River during the dam removal process. So that's pretty large-scale dam, all the way to much smaller structures, such as this here in Virginia. This is in the town of Waynesboro, West Virginia. This is a project that we worked on in 2011 with Trout Unlimited and the state of Virginia to take this thing down, and ended up opening up over 27 miles of habitat for brook trout. This was another voluntary dam removal. This dam had served a number of purposes over the years, including water supply for the city, power generation, and then manufacturing. But at some point along the line, a homeowners association had it in their possession and went to, I believe Trout Unlimited is who they approached to originally with the idea to remove it. And then we partnered with Trout Unlimited in the state to get it down. So another point I want to make about these dam and other barrier removals is that, it's really important and good for native fish conservation, but also in many cases, there's benefits to local communities as well. I'm going to try and play this short clip and hopefully it works over Zoom. But, I think most are familiar with low-head dams, but just to illustrate kind of, they can be pretty big safety hazards as well. So if we're working to remove dams like this, you know, we're having good benefits for the ecosystem and for fish, but also potentially removing a pretty big safety hazard from that community. And this is illustrated here in this graphic where, you know, the water flows over and then you just get this churning backwash that if people get caught in there, they can die. Culvert replacement at road stream crossings is another big focus of the program. So we often have undersized culverts like the one here on the left. This is up in Alaska, or perched culverts like the one that I showed at the beginning of the presentation. And we'll work with partners to replace these with culverts that more closely mimic the natural stream channel, like the picture here on the right. So this allows fish passage at a variety of stream flows, but also ensures other physical processes of the river are minimally disrupted.
One more minute, Eric. Thanks.
One more minute. Wow. Okay. All right. I'm going to rush through. So just another example of benefiting fish while also having benefits for communities. You minimize the risk of having road washouts like you have here. So another type of project we work on is fishways. In many cases, it's just we're not able to take down a dam, so we'll put in structures such as a fishway to bypass that barrier without taking it out. We also do a lot of work with the agricultural community and other water users, particularly in the Western US. And with these projects, it's all about balancing the needs of the water users without seeing benefits for conservation of the species we care about as well. So these projects are from a project in Reno, Nevada, where they worked on a water diversion that was taking water out of the river for a water treatment plant. And our program worked with the water treatment facility to rebuild that diversion and then also get a more natural stream channel in there to allow fish passage. And then I'll just highlight, this is a pretty cool project that I highlighted before, but cool because it's benefiting this pretty iconic species, this Lahontan cutthroat trout. And I think I'm running out of time, so I can't go too much into it, but I would really encourage folks to check out this article in Fisheries Magazine where they talked about just some really great stuff that's going on where it's involving fish passage, some water rights agreements, and then also some hatchery work through the Fish and Wildlife Service to bring back this pretty iconic species. Here's some other links to check out. There's a time-lapse video on replacing a culvert up in Alaska. There's a podcast on the Lahontan cutthroat recovery work, and then our program website. And that question.
Wonderful, Eric. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. You can stop sharing your screen now. And next will be Bernie. We'll start queuing up, but I'll go to Molly first to see if there's some questions. It looks like there are quite a few questions have come in. Do you have one to ask Eric right now in the next minute?
Yeah, Eric, there's been a couple questions about monitoring. Do you monitor before and after the removal of dams or fishway projects to see the benefits of the removal?
Yeah, so it kind of runs the gamut in terms of how intensive that monitoring is and what parameters we are monitoring. And a lot of the time, this is where, you know, we have some role, but we're also relying on partners in a lot of cases to do that. So at minimum, I mean, there's before and after photos. There was a dam, now there's not a dam. So, you know, there's some results there. Oftentimes it's water temperature and water quality monitoring, but then there's also, you know, more complicated, are there more fish in the river that oftentimes takes pretty intensive monitoring efforts that we try and do in some cases, but, you know, it's a balance in terms of how much resources you can and are able to put into that type of work versus actually doing more work on the ground.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Molly, for fielding the questions. Next, Bernie, if you can share your screen now, turn on your video and unmute yourself. You're up next. Bernie Gaeta is the aquatic conservation biologist at Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in the US. He studied life history, systems, and genetics of over 20 federally threatened and endangered freshwater species over the past 30 years. And he's going to talk about some of the migrations that we often don't think of yet are critically important for some amazingly beautiful species like this. Take it away, Bernie. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Josh, and to everyone for this wonderful opportunity. And Steve and Eric really did a nice job of setting this up. So there's really a rich diversity of freshwater fishes in the continental United States, as well as other aquatic critters. And this is really concentrated here in the southeastern US. I was involved in a paper that came out last year where we looked at the species richness, endemism and impairment of crayfish, mussels, and freshwater fishes in 290 watersheds in the southeast. And there's 3 watersheds that really stand out above all the others: the Cumberland River, the Tennessee River, and the Mobile Basin. In fact, there's over 400 species of fishes in these 3 drainages, which is almost half the fish diversity in the US and Canada, in 1.4% of the area. And I'm lucky enough to live right in the center of this in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I will be talking about fishes in the Tennessee and Mobile Basin. So as we all know, it is sedimentation and siltation is one of the major threats to southeastern freshwater fishes, as well as habitat fragmentation from dams and culverts. And of course, these hanging culverts are the worst. And even when the water gets up high enough for an animal to get through there, it's so rapid, they can't make it. Here's a map of Alabama and some surrounding drainages and states, and it's really highlighting some of these watersheds that are exceptional for their aquatic biodiversity. And one nice thing about these strategic habitat units, they've actually counted culverts and how many are perched, and they've counted over 3,000 culverts in these units, and almost a third of them are perched. So you can see it's a big problem. One of the fishes I will be talking about, the federally threatened slackwater darter, it happens to live in one of these drainages that they've georeferenced 378 culverts, and you can see that almost 40% of those are perched. And they're found in other tributaries to the main stem of the Tennessee River in northern Alabama and Tennessee. Another species I'm talking about is a federally endangered rush darter. They also looked at 378 culverts in the drainage it's found in, and over 30% of those are perched. And this species is also found in another drainage in central Alabama. 2 other species I'm talking about, the laurel dace, which is a federally endangered species just upstream of this map in the Tennessee River in Tennessee. And lastly, the tri-spot darter, federally threatened species, found in the upper Coosa drainage in Tennessee and Georgia, as well as in central Alabama. Now, the laurel dace, it does not travel to ephemeral groundwater to spawn, but I wanted to talk about this fish because it is on the brink of extinction. This is a fish that in one of the 2 streams where it's secure, the habitat usually looks great. You can get 30 individuals with a couple seine hauls, but over the last several years, it's gone from being found in 5 streams to only 2 streams globally. It's mostly due to poor agricultural practices, but in 2016, due to climate change, we had an exceptional drought in the area, and it really hit a lot of these streams hard. This is what the stream looked like in June. This is what it looked like in November. Up by the road in September, there were a few isolated pools. We saved some laurel dace from these pools. In November, they were gone. So to help repopulate upstream, Fish and Wildlife programs, along with other partners, replace these hanging culverts with a bottomless culvert. And hopefully this will help get this fish doing a little better, but it's not in good shape. Okay, now let's go to the 3 species that actually leave their non-breeding streams and migrate to ephemeral seeps to spawn. The first one is the rush darter found in Alabama. This is its non-breeding habitat, Turkey Creek proper or a tributary to Turkey Creek. And then this is what it spawns in, these tiny ephemeral seeps. You find both breeding adults and the juveniles in April and May, but in June, these things are totally dry. The fish have migrated downstream. The problem with these is they're really susceptible habitats. Landowners don't think they're very important because they're dry most of the time. And here the landowner gone with backhoe and completely destroyed the spawning habitat for the federally endangered rush darter. All that were left were green sunfish. These rush darters are amazing climbers. This Mill Creek, due to headwater cuts from channelization further downstream, it can climb 1.5 meters to this perched wetland, this ephemeral wetland, and spawns, and we found 7 or 8 juveniles with just 1 seine haul. But it cannot overcome these hanging culverts. We get rush darters right up to this road crossing, and they're not found 1 kilometer in any of the stream 1 kilometer upstream. It's going to be replaced hopefully next year. Here's a new population we found with these undersized culverts. Just last fall, it was replaced, and now these fish can migrate into these ephemeral headwaters to spawn. The next fish I'm talking about is slackwater darter. This is found in the Tennessee River drainage in northern Alabama and southern Tennessee. It spawns in February. The picture on the right has ice. We found spawning individuals under the ice. This is great habitat for it, but it also goes to plowed cotton fields to reproduce. As long as it has that ephemeral groundwater, some terrestrial vegetation to lay its eggs on, and an avenue to get there, it can even survive and reproduce in these harsh circumstances. So once again, we identify these hanging culverts. This was on a personal driveway, and replace them with bridges where they can get to their ephemeral spawning grounds. The last one I'm talking about is the tri-spot darter. This is a fish that for 50 years was thought to be extirpated from the state of Alabama. It was discovered again in 2008. Once again, it lives in the non-breeding habitat in larger creeks. And then in February, it goes to these ephemeral streams to spawn. Another spawning site is an ephemeral flooded hardwood forest. This one male I found, he was so fired up. He had the blue not only on the sides, but across the back, where normally you have black saddles. He was one studly fish. We also work with tri-spot darters further upstream in the Coosa River system. And this is the non-spawning habitat in a couple of creeks. Then fast forward to February. Once again, here's spawning habitat in this instance, a cow pasture. And the photograph on the right, once again, there's ice, and they're spawning underneath the ice in February. It's truly amazing. Cows walk across here, but they seem to do okay even in this degraded habitat because they have that ephemeral groundwater, vegetation, and a way to get there. We recently discovered a new spawning population in a monoculture pine forest. This property is up for sale, so we might be able to help preserve the spawning site, but we tried to get to it in February of this year, and once again, global climate change, instead of creating a drought, it creates these huge floods. The spawning site was underwater. We have no idea whether that just completely obliterated the spawning season at this site because of this high water, but it's just another instance of climate change wreaking havoc with aquatic animals. And once again, like these other species, in February, there's water at spawning sites. In non-breeding season, they're dry. And here's another success story at one of the breeding sites in Alabama. A culvert has been replaced with a bridge. Now, we think that this unique spawning of leaving permanent larger streams and rivers and going into these ephemeral seeps may drive evolution. Our hypothesis was that the slackwater darter found in the Tennessee River system, because it lives in these larger rivers, before the Tennessee River was impounded, it migrated between these various tributaries, and we thought we'd find one pretty uniform genetic species. Well, we looked at mitochondrial DNA, and there's over 6% sequence divergence between these 4 different streams. They're 4 different species. And we hypothesized this is driven by these ephemeral seeps. It's a rare habitat, and so they have developed to sniff it out likely, just like salmon, and they go back to their natal streams. We have more evidence of that with the tri-spot darter. This is in central Alabama, and we have 3 separate spawning sites where the mouths of these ephemeral seeps are just 100 meters or so away from each other. And it looks like 75% of the fishes return to their natal spawning site to spawn again based on microsatellite DNA. Now, we just did this for a year, but once again, this is indication that this is a unique, rare habitat, and they imprint on this and then return to it as spawning adults. I did want to mention quickly that there are 3 other species of darters that have the same life history of going to these ephemeral seeps. They're closely related to the slackwater darter, but they're found in the central United States in the Ozark and Ouachita uplands. And with that, I will take any questions.
Fantastic, Bernie. Wow, what an incredible collection of species. And it's amazing that more people don't know about these. And even these small migrations, you can see how important it is to maintain genetic diversity. And it does make me wonder about invasive species in places that you might not want to connect, which is one of the problems we have with some of our native species here in Maine.
There's another species I work with, the Barron's top minnow, and there's an invasive species, a mosquito fish, and barriers are the only thing keeping that from going extinct.
Wow, excellent. All right, I'll go to Molly now. Check the questions and answer box. Do you have any questions for Bernie?
You actually just answered one of them about barriers and hanging culverts in all locations as a threat to fish passage. So that was great. A question about how frequently the darters spawn in ephemeral habitat and what is their preferred spawning habitat? How far do they travel?
Some of them may travel over a kilometer, like the rush darter, and like all other darters, they're batch spawners. So a female will maybe get 30, 40 ripe eggs, she'll spawn them, and then in another week, another batch of eggs will become ripe and she'll spawn them. So she may have 5 or 6 episodes of spawning over February and March. And so the spawning season lasts quite a while.
All right, do we have another question?
Yep. How important is groundwater input?
These species, the tri-spot darter, the slackwater darter, the rush darter, it appears that they have to spawn in these groundwater seeps. If it's not groundwater, it's the wrong water chemistry for the embryos and the larvae to be successful. So, they may be able to spawn right on the edge of the stream if there's some groundwater influence, but if they're cut off from these spawning grounds, they're going to have no or very little success at spawning. It's crucial.
And we have one last question. Does the Fish and Wildlife Service have a regulatory jurisdiction where the farmer ripped up the spawning habitat?
Yes and no. Yes, if they can prove direct take, they could do something, but you see this all the time. Sorry with Fish and Wildlife folks listening, but it was an 80-year-old guy. He promised not to do it again, so they just didn't proceed. And quite often, there's not a lot of teeth in the Endangered Species Act if you can't prove take. And then there's these political decisions that are made with a law. It's all interesting.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bernie. That was wonderful. Just for other folks who are participating, it looks like there's over 190 people out there. Remember the question and answer box, and our speakers, please monitor the questions and answer, because you can type answers, and I think multiple speakers could answer a single question, which might be really helpful and informative, and we can save all those for use later. So Bernie, why don't you stop sharing your screen right now, and then Carla or Dennis, you can start digging out your presentation, turn on your video and unmute yourselves. So Carla Knight and Dennis Zimmerman with the Yukon First Nation, Carcross-Tagish First Nation, Kwanlin Dun First Nation, and the Da'Anish Council. Carly Knight is a biologist born and raised in Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, and is now working on Carcross-Tagish First Nation government as a natural resource manager. And Dennis Zimmerman is an independent fisheries consultant and a PhD candidate that has lived and worked in Northern Canada for over 20 years. He sits on the International Yukon River Panel and facilitates community-based fish and wildlife processes both in Canada and internationally. So very much looking forward to the work you're doing with your native communities, ecological human communities in this incredible part of North America. Thank you, Carly and Dennis.
Great, thanks. Just do a quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine, thanks.
Great, so I'm gonna start us off and Carly Knight is gonna jump in as well. We're tag team on this presentation. Thank you for this platform. Fish migration will become very obvious how important it is for us in our particular, in this case, the Yukon River Chinook salmon. I do need to acknowledge it's a team effort, and we do have some of our participants attending this and looking at this behind the scenes. So I want to acknowledge the Kwamandun First Nation and Brandy Mays and Shane Bradley, Carcross Tagish First Nation, of course, Carly and Corley Johns, and the Ta'an Quechan Council, Christina Beckman, as well as Dr. Shannon Bauer, who's part of my team as a facilitator. So we are salmon people, connecting the Broken Salmon Trail. So I think it's really important that we start off with an acknowledgement because that's really foundational to this. So we live and work within the traditional territories of these 3 First Nation governments. Our presentation will highlight our salmon story. It'll share some information about our very special territory and our majestic salmon. We hope to lift up some of the scientific research being conducted by these First Nation governments and celebrate the first year of our Southern Lakes community-based salmon planning efforts. So where is the Yukon? We are nestled in the top northwest corner of Canada, and we are right beside Alaska, our neighbor, Arctic Ocean to the north, and BC to the south. So we're in a real hotbed of interesting fish and wildlife. A lot of migratory species, caribou, and of course salmon. So I wanted to also know we are a population of 35,000 people. We have more moose and caribou than people. So we are quite fortunate to have a lot of great habitat. We don't have a lot of the same urban issues that perhaps you would have in other parts of the world or in southern Canada. So habitat is generally not our challenge. There's 14 different First Nations. You can see them here, and there's a ton of overlap, and each one of them is unique, and they're all have settled land. Well, 11 of them have settled land claims. And numerous of them live along the Yukon River, Porcupine River, and the Alsek drainage, so they are salmon people. But as you can tell, they're all individual, separate, self-governing nations, which allows them to set their own laws and govern their lands as it relates to resources, education, justice, etc. So this creates a real interesting management and governance complexity, as well as with the territorial or provincial government and a federal government. So there is quite a complexity. We also, every salmon that passes into the Yukon has to go through Alaska. So we have a lot of treaties. We have a treaty called the Yukon River Salmon Agreement and the Yukon River Panel between Alaska and Yukon. And that stipulates border passage and harvest sharing arrangements. And as you can imagine, we're very much at the mercy of the Alaskans and the 50+ communities along the Yukon River that are the lifeblood of these communities for commercial, subsistence, recreational, etc. So it is quite a complex environment. We have Chinook, chum, sockeye, and coho, but in Yukon River we have fall chum and Chinook salmon. Oh, that's Carly's. So yeah, I guess just to talk quickly, unfortunately, like other salmon stocks in the West Coast, Pacific salmon stocks, these fish are not in a good state. We've seen considerably lower abundance, about 50% of what they used to be in the 80s. We have no recreational fishing in Canada. We have no commercial harvesting in Canada. We have a small First Nation subsistence fishery that they are drastically sacrificing and voluntarily restricting. And Carly will talk more about that. We also have concerning changes in size structure, ages, and a lot of those productivity factors as well that are getting onto the spawning grounds. 50% of the run spawns in Canada. And with that, Carly's going to take over and talk about her nation's project.
Excellent.
Thanks, Dennis. Can you go to, oh, good, we're on my slide now. I'm just gonna dive right in. So the Yukon River is home to the world's longest Chinook salmon migration at almost 3,200 kilometers, one of the longest known salmon migrations in the world. At the headwaters in southern Yukon lie the traditional territories of the Tonquachon Council, Kwanlundun First Nation, and Carcross-Tagish First Nation. You want to switch slides there, Dennis?
Yeah.
For time immemorial, the first peoples of this watershed have relied on salmon and other species for subsistence. Having only roughly 1% of the entire Yukon River Chinook salmon population reach the headwaters and an international border along the river, this population has been proven extremely difficult to manage. We know that Pacific salmon on the west coast of North America are in decline, but there's a substantial difference in the number of returning spawners when compared to traditional knowledge baselines, affecting everyone along the river. Historic reports indicated that thousands of Chinook salmon used to be harvested above where today's Whitehorse Hydro Dam is located. Are you having trouble with the presentation there, DZ?
Sorry, do you want to just tell me when to do next slide?
Sure.
Okay, that'd be good. Thanks.
Can you put it back in presenter view?
Yeah.
Perfect. Historic reports indicated that thousands of Chinook salmon used to be harvested above where today's hydro dam is located. However, returns at the fish ladder have averaged only 1,200 fish over the past 15 years, with only 282 salmon passing through the ladder just last year. Many salmon die along their way to their spawning grounds, as we know, through things like natural predation, fluctuating water levels and temperatures, as well as fishing. But the ones that make it to their spawning grounds are extremely important for the salmon's future generations, as well as the ecosystem as a whole. Next slide, please. On behalf of Carcross-Tagish First Nation and in partnership with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, my counterpart and project co-lead, William Twardak, and I have been conducting acoustic telemetry research to determine the fate of the returning Upper Yukon River Chinook salmon after they pass through the ladder. We have had many other partners join in on the initiative over the years, including both the Tonquachon Council and Kwanlundun First Nation. Next slide, please. Using a series of acoustic receivers methodically placed throughout the watershed, we are tagging and tracking salmon at the ladder, as well as netting, tagging, and tracking salmon below the dam, all in an attempt to determine the fate of the salmon who successfully passed through the ladder, and whether challenges associated with fish passage at the ladder are limiting production of this particular population. This research also aims to provide more insight to the challenges, behaviors, and passage success of Chinook salmon at the ladder. Next slide, please. Carcass surveys are also being conducted below the hydro dam to determine sex, body condition, and spawning success. This data will help us better understand the fate of the salmon who did not pass through the ladder. Next slide, please. These Chinook salmon are astonishing throughout their entire life cycle. In the Yukon River drainage basin, the fry emerged from the gravel where they were spawned. Emergent juveniles can be found in still water areas such as the advancing microhabitats along the shoreline. Juvenile Chinook are then carried downstream into the larger Yukon River all the way out to the Bering Sea. Each fall, adult Chinook make the 3,200-kilometer journey upstream to return to their spawning grounds. Next slide, please. The hydro dam was built in Whitehorse, Yukon in the 1950s within the last couple hundred kilometers of the salmon's journey to their spawning grounds. More than 60 years of successful fish passage at the ladder and subsequent spawning provide clear evidence of individual passage, but the extent of the impact of the dam is still largely unknown. The ladder has been in operation for over 60 years, yet no studies have been completed to determine the proportion of fish that can actually make it through the ladder. The dam is supplemented by a fish hatchery that undoubtedly assists with returning numbers, but the average return is still quite low. Our research efforts will help with informed decision-making processes in the future for potential habitat restoration, in-stream incubation sites, future land decisions, water licensing and recommendations, and so much more. And next slide, please. Our people have discontinued traditional fishing practices, in part due to conservation efforts, but largely because there simply aren't any salmon to fish. Traditionally, fish camp was so much more than just harvest. Fish camp was school, biology, language, cultural identity, sharing, trading, learning, teaching, etc. Parkrest-Tagish First Nation used this research as an essential first step to growing this population for our future generations and reconnecting our people with the Broken Salmon Trail, because after all, we are salmon people. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
And that's it for me, so Gunashish.
All right. Thanks, Carly. So I wanted to, can you hear me? You were coming through? Yeah.
Yes, you're coming through fine, Dennis.
Okay, great. I just wanted to highlight a couple other research projects just to round this out. So the Tonquachin Council work on a Fox Creek Chinook restoration salmon project since 2009. And they've been seeing adults since returning to spawn since 2013. And then I also wanted to bring forward the, sorry, there we go. The Kwantlen First Nation been working on Mishi Creek salmon monitoring for close to 2 decades. So they do a lot of beaver dam removal, a lot of passage work there, habitat restoration, and of course, they're doing some trials around salmon stock restoration using incubation boxes. So I wanted to, we've presented some of the incredible technical work from the Yukon First Nations, and I wanted to round it out with this community-based salmon planning effort. So using a socio-ecological systems approach, which aligns well with a holistic indigenous worldview to some extent, and using traditional knowledge, we try to round out the other aspects of the salmon plans. So what's really important is that we do a ton of engagement with citizens, youth, elders, and we essentially identify their values and priorities that serve as a foundation for the plan. Because a lot of the governance structures are Western science-based, and they do limit a lot of the First Nation values. So we try to bring this all together, and we have a very supportive Department of Fisheries and Oceans that does support that process. So these are some of the values that have come forward. So traditional law, stories, ceremony, celebration, spirituality, etc. And we, again, through these workshops, we have a lot of engagement, because ultimately, if they are not supported by the citizens of these nations, then we just don't have the mandate to move forward. So with that, I wanted to, that's all I have. And I guess I did want to just highlight where the Reconnecting the Broken Salmon Trail, there is a long history of caribou migration. And with that, there's archaeology for a long time where the First Nations have traveled to hunt caribou. And this same was in place for salmon. People would travel around to different salmon areas. Unfortunately, this was broken. So the reference to the Broken Salmon Trail is sort of giving credence to the caribou and the salmon connection, as well as the traditional paths and the way salmon work. So thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. That was fantastic. What an incredible model, really, for First Nations around Canada, the tribes in the US, and just that level of collaboration and exploration and rebonding. I think we have time for just one question. Molly, do you have one?
Yeah, a question about beaver dam removal. In the US and Oregon, beaver dams can create habitat for salmon, so why remove them?
I think probably Carly and I could take that one, but we also have a rich history of trapping. So beaver dam restoration was a traditional practice, essentially. They would see that streams and rivers were healthy, and part of it is subsistence as well. So there's a cultural connection to beaver trapping. So that's a big part of it. And also, we have a lot of beaver. So, there is definitely, it's also a way of maintaining a connection to a fishery and a habitat when you're not actively harvesting those fish. So to be doing something like habitat restoration through beaver dam removal is a really good way of employing people and keeping people engaged.
And I'll just quickly add to that. In some cases, the beaver dams are actually blocking the salmon or fish passage upstream to their spawning grounds. So In some cases, in some cases, it is essential to actually remove the dam or at least create a channel where the fish can pass through.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carly, and thank you, Dennis. Great presentation. Dennis, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Great. Thank you.
The next talk is Ben Hausman, who worked for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and has been the lead biologist at Bonneville Dam for the past 16 years as one of the largest fish passage facilities in the world. Excuse me. Bonneville Dam, sorry, having technical troubles here. Bonneville Dam is incredibly complex, as you can imagine, for such a big river and such a big dam, and he confronts new and thought-provoking challenges on almost a daily basis. This is also, so Ben, I will share my screen and let you, you are seeing the presentation, and
I do indeed. Thank you, sir.
you can share. You can
Don't have it yet.
No, you know, I'm not seeing that control here for
I don't have my
view the
video
control.
started. I don't know if that matters.
No, it would be good if you start your video, and I will advance the slides for you.
I can't do it without the host enabling it.
Let's see.
Okay. How's that?
Good. I think we're good. Why don't you start? Can you see the slides?
I can see the slides, but I do not have control, Josh.
No, I can't. Looks like I can't hand it to you in this webinar mode. So I will
That's
advance it for you when you say so.
Yeah, that'll work. So thank you, Josh, for everything. And hello, everyone. Really glad to be here. Like Josh said, my talk is about Bonneville Dam. It's the most downstream dam on the Columbia River. And I was just going to speak about kind of the multi-faceted approach that we use to solving the fish passage challenges we have here with the multiple species that we deal with. If you could advance the slide, Josh, please. So Bonneville is comprised of two powerhouses and a spillway. The original powerhouse and spillway were constructed in 1938, and the second powerhouse, which is on the Washington shore, was finished in 1982 after moving the town of North Bonneville several miles downstream, moving the highway, moving the railroad, and excavating a new channel. So the entire dam's about 1,000 meters across, and it connects the states of Washington and Oregon. Has a total generating capacity about 1,200 megawatts. Salmon passage for both adults and juveniles was part of the original construction. And while the passage techniques and facilities for adults is largely unchanged from 1938, juvenile passage techniques have dramatically evolved, and I'll try to show that to some extent. Next slide, please, Josh. So here on the left side, you see construction in 1937. That ladder is just north of the spillway. The ladder you see on the right is a shot from 2018. Same ladder. Primarily, nothing has changed. That's kind of a challenge for us to some extent, is that these are original components for the most part. So when we go to get parts, we're often scavenging from what we have on hand. It's a gravity feed system, no pumps or anything to maintain it. They're the classic kind of overflow weir adult fish ladder that people have probably seen before. So fish have the opportunity to either go over the weirs or stay underwater and go through some underwater orifices. this overflow section is the vast majority of the ladder, and at the very top there's a serpentine section to control velocity as it comes in from the forebay or the water above the dam. Could probably go to the next slide, please. So some of these structures are large. I'm not sure you can get a scale of the one on the left, but it's quite large. The small orifice you see down there in the lower left screen with a little bit of light coming through it is about a 2 foot by 2 foot orifice. That's where the fish can swim through if they choose to stay underwater. Other than that, they go over the weirs for the vast majority of the time. And really what we do primarily for adults is provide them the attraction flow. So all we're doing is taking the tailwater elevation, which is the water below the dam, and bumping up our ladder elevation to be 1.5 feet above that. Because we have no dam below us, water fluctuation is 30 to 35 feet seasonally in our tail race. So our ladders have to fluctuate with that to maintain that attraction flow and that 1.5 foot differential. If you do that, as I'm sure many of you know, if not all of you, the fish will come. And as you see on the right, that's a good day at Bonneville Dam. That's the upper serpentine section as they go past the count windows right before they enter into the forebay and continue to move upstream. Next slide, please. So juvenile passage, that is the challenge for us. Adults have remained largely the same for the duration of the dam construction. Juveniles have changed dramatically. So they had juvenile passage built into the original structure. As things have changed over time, it's just sort of become antiquated and no longer used. So what the primary mode of passage is now on many of the Columbia River dams is spill. So what you see on the picture on the left is our spillway, and what we spill is from April 10th to August 31st every year, and we spill 100 to 150,000 cubic feet per second, or 2,800 to 4,200 cubic meters per second for most of you. A lot of water. So the water that goes through our spillway is enough to power an entire powerhouse worth of generation. So it is it's something that's been made a priority, and it's very important regionally. So although you give up a lot of hydropower to do this, it's vastly important, and it is the main passage route for juveniles going downstream. Approximately 50% of our fish go through that spillway. What you see just below that on the picture on the left is what we call the corner collector, and it's a surface bypass route. Passes much fewer fish, but it's also much less water. It's about 5,000 cubic feet per second, or what is that, 141 cubic meters per second, I believe. So that water is coming from the surface on the forebay side, passing through. It's super efficient. Our fish per volume of water is much greater bang for the buck for that particular system, and our survival is nearly 100%. So anything we can put through that, we do all our operational manipulations to make that happen. What you see on the right is the inside of that structure. It's approximately 30 miles per hour, so the water is really moving through there. The walls are extremely smooth. This was designed for juvenile fish, and what it is a what we call an ice and trash sluiceway, which is basically a bypass structure for ice and a trash being woody debris primarily to come down to the big river system to get it off of the turbine units, trash racks. So by moving that around there, you just keep it off and out of your hair more or less. But the bypass system was extended. So instead of going into the immediate tail race below the dam, we extended it down with this about 850 meter channel that comes down and discharges fish there. Basically that presents fish into a location where they have the spillway water and the powerhouse water coming together for fast egress conditions out of our tail race, which helps with predation. And it's kind of the pride of Bonneville Dam with regard to fish passage because of its high survival rate and its efficiency. Next slide, please, Josh.
And you've got about another minute.
Oh, okay. So these are submersible traveling screens. This is another option we have for passing fish through Bonneville. They are a mesh covered screen that kind of rotate around and keep fish from going through the turbine units, and they put fish into a channel that diverts them 2 miles underground through a pipe back into the tail race and to be able to migrate and continue down to the ocean. What you see on the right is our juvenile bypass facility that allows us to do condition sampling and get some feedback on how those fish look as they come through our system. Next slide, please. Much less high profile migrating fish besides salmon is lamprey. Pacific lamprey, which have been more or less neglected until recent years, from the last 20 years probably. Everything was salmon centric and not necessarily friendly for lamprey. So lamprey are obviously a native fish, and what you see on the right is specific lamprey passage structures that we've put in to pass lamprey. They're installed in all of our main ladders, and they pass fish pretty effectively. They require very little water. They pass fish into the forebay, and they're helping us to recover what was a declining Pacific lamprey population. Next slide. This is another picture of a lamprey passage structure. Very steep, as you see, but lamprey do not have a problem. They can go practically vertically. On the right, you see a lamprey in that structure that we don't see a lot of pictures of them because they pass primarily at night, but it works very effectively. And next slide. I'm going to try and go fast. I hate to skip time on the white sturgeon, the king of the Columbia in my mind. They don't do a lot of passage past our structure. They can pass, but primarily it's just how we alter operations and how we handle salvage to deal with these kind of fish. Everything from when a turbine comes online to how it goes offline is dictated by the presence of these fish, because they like the deep, dark holes that our turbine draft tubes provide them. So everything now is geared towards starting things slowly to prevent injury to them. As you can see, salvage of a large fish of 10 feet and 400 pounds, or 3 meters and what do we call 400 pounds, 180 kilograms is a challenge. Next slide, please. Here's an example of one from several years back. This is the inside of one of our fish ladders. You can see a large scale structure. That was about 2,000 fish that we had to remove in a week's time. So folks removing them, they're stretchered out, they're craned out, they're put back into the water. And that particular operation had 0 mortalities. We're very proud of our success in handling fish there. And next slide, please. And how do you monitor all these without monitoring facilities? We have, like I said, the smolt monitoring facility for the fish that are going through our bypass. What you see on the left is our adult fish monitoring facility, where it was our first chance to get returning fish in the Columbia River system. And on the right, installed inside the B2 corner collector that I talked about, is the world's largest pit tag detector, which works extremely effectively in tracking our fish as they migrate down and head towards the ocean. And with that, if I have any time left, I'm happy to take any questions.
Fantastic, Ben. Thank you so much. Such a huge river and such an incredible problem to deal with. We've got time for just one question. Molly, if you've got something for Ben.
Yeah, how about monitoring predation of juvenile salmon below the downstream fish passage?
So monitoring predation of juveniles is probably not done to a great extent. We do a lot of monitoring of adults because we do have a sea lion population below the dam. So we have on our downstream decks, we have multiple folks that are core employees that monitor predation by sea lions, but primarily that's adults and juveniles. It's a little bit harder to get a handle on juvenile predation, but there are programs in place for folks to remove some of those predators in the Columbia River. It's strangely a bounty system. So that's a system that works to some extent, but it doesn't give us a good grasp on necessarily the extent of that, which includes everything from birds to piscivorous fish.
Fantastic, Ben. Thank you so much. And remember, if you have other questions for Ben, you can enter them in the chat. And Ben and other speakers, be sure to monitor the chat, but also the questions and answers. Molly reminded us that you can look at the dismissed questions and re-answer those if you've got something else. So without further ado, David Gould is the Director of the Department of Marine and Environmental Affairs for the town of Plymouth. He's going to talk to us about some amazing restoration over 20 years in a place that's celebrating a special 400-year anniversary. And with that, I'll let you take it away, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Hear you fine. Thank you.
All right. So as Josh just said, the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts is celebrating our 400th anniversary. So we'll actually do a presentation here on Town Brook, which was at the very heart of the first Pilgrim settlement.
Dave, you're on mute, maybe because you're cursing about advancing your slide.
Yeah, it's not moving ahead.
Let's see. You've tried enter and page down.
Yep.
Let's see. I can also open your presentation if that's helpful. If you can't get it moving, why don't I try that? Will you stop sharing your screen and I'll share mine, and it'll be a little bit slower if you have to have me advance it, but press stop share and I'll share your presentation on mine.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just real briefly about our restoration approach. We look at the entire watershed, looking to address fish passage issues as well as water quality issues. And we look at restoring the processes within the river restoration work that we're doing. We'll talk very briefly about our strong partnerships and how over time, over the last 20 years, we've been able to build some trust and confidence and continuing to do project after project. So real quickly about Town Brook, relatively short stream, 1.7 miles, which runs from Billington Sea, which don't let that confuse you. It is actually a freshwater pond, and it is the stream of natives and pilgrims in American history. So a lot of history at this location. Over the last 20 years, we've done 5 dam removals, and we've been able to forge a really enduring partnership with NOAA, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Next slide, please. Real quickly, this is just a map showing Billington Sea and Town Brook flowing out to the coast. The mouth of Town Brook is located a couple hundred yards away from Plymouth Rock. So again, it speaks to the historic and archaeological importance of this site. Next slide, please. Among the challenges that we had when we started this program 20 years ago was that Town Brook, while relatively small and 1.7 miles, had numerous dams on it from the Industrial Revolution. There was very poor, if any, fish passage on it around any of these dams, and the water quality had been severely degraded with thermal regime being significantly altered, low dissolved oxygen, and sediment contamination from all the mills that were located at each one of the dams. We also had some serious public safety concerns. Obviously, a series of dams located within a rather populated downtown location, as well as historic and archaeological concerns being one of the most historic places in the United States. So among our goals were to reduce that fragmentation and restore ecological connectivity that was created by the presence of all the dams, and to restore that very historic anadromous fish run of alewife and blueback herring. It was also to improve the water quality. Everything we could do to improve water quality at Town Brook also improved our harbor. And we did that through land protection as well as a series of stormwater projects. Again, trying to think watershed based and not just address the dam removals, but look at land, open space protection, and stormwater improvements and everything that contributed to the brook. And each one of the projects, and we'll show some photos of those, we were looking to restore in-stream habitat, pools and riffles, wetlands, woody habitat, floodplain, and you'll see some photos of that coming up. So here's a great photo from our good friend Keith Ellenbogen, who did this underwater photography for us over the last several years. So Town Brook again is an anadromous fish run, primarily alewife, but with some blueback herring. And this is just one of those wonderful shots of all the fish migrating up the brook. Over the last 12 years, we've also done volunteer herring counts where we've been able to create population estimates for our herring run. And you can see in 2019, we started to see some of the results of all these ongoing dam removals. And this year is probably our best run yet. So we're seeing a lot of those juveniles come back 3, 4, 5 years after these dams have been removed and starting to see an uptick. And this year has been especially gratifying, one of the strongest runs that we've ever seen. So hopefully we'll surpass that 230,000 number that you see in 2019. We're just gonna go upstream real quick. This is right at the mouth of Town Brook, and there was a weir at this location. Weir in Massachusetts is a dam, just less than 5 feet in height, but to a fish, it's a barrier. And this was one of the projects we allowed all the migratory fish to get up into the channel. Prior to this project, they were stuck behind that weir until a sufficient high tide came in from the harbor and allowed the fish to get over that structure. So a very important project to undertake that's reaped some pretty big dividends. We have some unbelievably beautiful dam structures, as you can see on this one. This is a pretty rough looking site, and these were the conditions of a lot of these old industrial era dams where the fishway was misaligned with the culvert. Fish simply could not get through this site. And this was actually our first dam removal. I know Eric Hutchins is on, and this was a project that he helped initiate and was the first coastal dam removal in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Next slide. And this is that site and what it looks like today. We did some pit tag work with Abby Archer in 2008, and we know that about 96% of the fish that make it up to this location in the stream get through this restored section of channel. So we know the design was good, and we know that this was a successful project. We also know from that pit tag data, the next 2 dams were serious impediments to fish passage. And so that gave us the ammunition that we needed to go after those next 2. Next slide, please. This was one of those next 2 dams. This was called the off Billington Street Dam. Speaks a little bit to the public safety issue. This was actually a driveway for residents to drive over as well. So again, ecological issues, but public safety issues as well. And we were able to remove this dam and make it look upstream like the next slide, which is the former impoundment. So everything you're seeing there, you can see the stream channel obviously, but everything that you're seeing there in green up to that house over in the right side was underwater in the former impoundment. And again, successful passage at this site, which led up to our next dam, which was a pretty bad mess. What's most interesting about this site was that it's got a pretty rough looking dam, obviously with serious ecological issues and poor fish passage. But it was a contaminated site. We actually, as a municipality, we acquired this site. We actually bought it with the sole intent of cleaning it and removing the dam itself. And so show you what that project looks like upstream on the next slide. And again, fish passage, once fish can make it up to here, it's a clear shot all the way up to Billington Sea, which is the headwaters. And so once they get there, clear sailing up at that point. And so one of our biggest dam removals, which is the Holmes Dam, which was done over the last couple of years, is a little bit downstream of this, and talk about that real briefly. Next slide, please. This is the Holmes Dam. This was the biggest dam that we had on Town Brook, about 16 structural feet, which isn't too high, but in Massachusetts, that's a pretty good sized dam. And you can see the impoundment and contractor mobilizing on site. We finished this project last year, and we had both pre and post pit tag data. and it's been pretty successful, and we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. This is downstream of the dam itself in the restored park. You can see the restored stream channel with the pool and the riffle complex going, heading downstream. This isn't too far from the ocean. And you can see the new bridge, which is also fish passable with a rock ramp that was installed under that. And in this section of stream, we set up a series of pit tags, again, with Abby Archer. And we were able to get some pre and post data on this project. Next slide, please. And this is our team, some of my staff as well as Abby, getting ready to do some pit tag. This was last year before social distancing, so just making folks aware this was last year. Next slide, please. Had to include this great photo of Alex Harrow and Happy Fish, because Alex has been a tremendous resource for all of us, and helping us with our pit tag projects and troubleshooting, and just a great resource for us. So shout out to Alex. Thank you. Next slide, please. So some of the accomplishments of this 20-year program, obviously the significant fish passage improvements, and helping to sustain a very historic natural resource. Significant water quality improvements, both for the brook and the harbor. We did some really significant sediment management. So each one of the impoundments had contaminated sediment in it from the historic mill use, and we had to excavate and dispose of that material. So cleaning up some real legacy issues in water quality and human safety issues. Public safety, obviously the removal of the dams themselves, but also getting new bridges and infrastructure put into place was critically important to the public. We also were able to bring in a lot of funding from state and federal sources to reduce the cost for the municipality to bring in that new infrastructure. And we also had an awful lot of public space investment, parks in the Greenway, which were important for us in developing support for our next project going forward. Next slide, please. So some of those lessons that we learned that our very important long-standing partnerships with state and federal agencies work, and those help sustain us over a very long time. It's one of the most proud things that we've done with this project is have these long-term relationships that are still going on and still looking to do more work. Very proud of that fact. And we also were able to determine that our channel design and our elevations in our pool and riffle complex work is also working. We know that from the pit tag data. I mentioned previously that we did some pit tag before and after data on the Holmes Dam project. So we know with the dam and fishways in place, we had about 25% passage. And we know with the dam gone and the river restored, we're getting 92% passage. And what that also told us we needed to do was when we did the pit tag data at the last remaining dam, was that there was still a little bit more work to do. Next slide, please. And that is at the historic mill, and that is a proposed bypass that we would like to continue to work on and get all the fish that are trying to get through this site around. Once they would get around this dam, it is a straight and clear shot for the first time in a couple hundred years to the spawning habitat. So we know that this will be our next important project. And if anyone there is bored at home and wants to see fish at Town Brook, if you go on to the PlymouthRiverHerring.org website, you can not only see the fish run live, you can also do fish counts and help us with our population estimates. Thank you so much.
Excellent, Dave. What a really cool project and a way to show a full watershed approach. We've got time for one quick question, Molly, if you've got one for Dave.
There's none in the chat window, but I have a question, Dave.
Sure.
So a lot of this project work was literally done in people's backyards, and I'm wondering about your experience getting the community on board with this restoration.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You're right. It was in people's front and backyards, and so it took a lot of public meetings and a lot of convincing folks that this was really going to be an improvement not only for the fish but for their public safety and for the environment. And I think once they got to see one of these projects happen and they saw how the site grew in over time and they really liked it, it was a much easier sell after that. And now when we talk about dam removal in Plymouth, we don't get those odd looks anymore. It's almost something that's to be expected, which is pretty tremendous.
Fantastic. Such cool projects, a lot more to learn. Folks, you should definitely check out that website, and a really neat tool where citizen science or crowdsourcing can help them count their fish coming in. Our next speaker, and the last one of this incredible webinar, reaching from New Zealand, which is just a few time zones east of Gordon Smith, to all the way back to Hawaii, near the international date line again. It's been an incredible bunch of talks. Gordon works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Pacific Island Office, where he leads the Hawaiian Fish Habitat Partnership. This brings together agencies, NGOs, private interests to plan and implement stream, estuary, and coral reef restoration projects. Gordon attended Oregon State University, and his master's is from the University of Hawaii in Manoa. Gordon, can you share your screen? There we go.
How's that look? Can you see it and hear me okay?
Yep, if you could put it in presentation mode, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks for the great introduction. And I know it's been quite a marathon, so I'll just move right along. As Josh mentioned, I coordinate the Hawaii Fish Habitat Partnership here in the islands. And what the partnership focuses on is conservation of native migratory fish and invertebrates in streams, also estuaries, and to a certain extent, coastal areas as well. And what I'll do today is just go through some real basic geography about the Hawaiian Islands, talk a little bit about their physical features and hydrology. I'll talk a little bit about the community of larger fish and invertebrates that inhabit freshwater systems in Hawaii. I can talk a little bit also about some conservation challenges and opportunities, especially with regard to fish passage. So the first thing is Hawaii's the most isolated island archipelago in the world. And I'll admit that this illustration is a little bit distorted, but it gets the point across that there are just enormous expanses of ocean in every direction, certainly to any continent, but it's also a very long ways to any of the islands of Oceania. And this isolation has really driven the physical features, the hydrology of the islands, and also the island biogeography in terms of community diversity and the levels of endemism. There are about 370 perennial streams located on the larger islands, which would be Kauai, Oahu, Molokai, Maui, and the Big Island. And the hydrology of these streams is supported by the trade winds, essentially. This is orographic rainfall. The trades are low elevation, warm, moist air masses that blow maybe 2/3 of the time. And as this moist air interacts with the island interiors, especially when the trades are deflected upwards, that air mass cools and it leads to precipitation. The shorthand version of describing streams in Hawaii is that they're short, steep, and flashy. Short because the islands are relatively small, steep because the islands are mountainous, and they're flashy because there are these very frequent flash floods, these freshets, where the flow increases substantially, again, in response to trade wind and moisture in the trade winds and rainfall. These freshets can happen more than once a day or every couple of days. It's a really common event to see substantial changes in flow over short periods of time. The larger stream fauna are all diadromous. There's 5 fish species. They're called o'opu in the native Hawaiian language. There's 2 shrimp, or a shrimp and a prawn called opai, and 2 snail species. And they're not all illustrated here. These are just the ones where I had some good photos. A lot of you folks that work on the continents are used to anadromy and catadromy, which are migratory events in a life cycle that are specifically tied to reproduction. These species, and actually a lot of other circumtropical species, are amphidromous. And amphidromy is when the migratory event is not specifically tied to reproduction. The adults live in the stream, they lay eggs, reproduce in the stream, and when the eggs hatch, the larvae are dispersed to the marine environment. They're planktonic for a period of time, and then once they become competent and they begin their metamorphosis to the adult or juvenile form, they begin this upstream migration. The unusual thing about the fish is that there is a morphological feature which helps with that upstream migration. Their pelvic fins are fused into a suction cup, a very muscular suction cup. If you hold a number of these fish in your hands, it's quite remarkable how they can cling to your skin. All of the fish and a couple of the invertebrates are considered species of special concern in our state wildlife conservation plan. Populations are pretty severely reduced, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those problems. In terms of migration, I've just started a film clip that shows one of these species. This is Lentipes concolor, and it's climbing a vertical face. So they can make their way up waterfalls even with substantial changes in flow. They can ascend waterfalls and get up and over them. Again, it's really amazing. Some of the waterfalls where there are populations of fish above them are hundreds of feet in elevation. In terms of the threats to the stream fauna, certainly urbanization is an issue. The photos show a couple of channelized sections, primarily for flood control. These frequent high flow events definitely cause threats to life and property. So there's a lot of channelization. There's issues with sedimentation, as illustrated by the dredging operation. And then there's also a host of plants and animals that are invasive. Hawaii is a very welcoming environment, particularly in the lower reaches of streams and in the estuarine margins. There are a number of woody species that completely occlude streams, completely change the channel form and function, and are in fact barriers to upstream and downstream migration. But what I'll focus on in the next couple of slides is a quick description of the issue of water diversion, specifically for irrigation. The photo shows a beautiful stream in central Maui, and as it comes down the channel, it's completely entrained. 100% of the flow is entrained through a metal grate into a pipe and tunnel, and is diverted out of the stream channel. Irrigation has a long history in Hawaii, primarily due to the cultivation of sugarcane. At its peak in terms of acreage in about 1930, there were tens of thousands of acres in sugar cultivation. It was a very lucrative crop. There was a lot of infrastructure built to get the fields in place and to deliver water. Sugar is known as a very thirsty crop, and enormous infrastructure was built to get water from the windward sides of the islands where the streams are more frequent and have plenty of water to the central and leeward sides of the islands where there's plenty of sunlight and sugar grew really well. And just to try and illustrate the extent of the irrigation infrastructure, this is a topo map of the island of Maui. Some of the larger stream systems are shown in dark blue, and I'll now superimpose the ditches, tunnels, and flumes that were installed and exist today to deliver water primarily to that central isthmus between the two larger landmasses that make up Maui. And at every one of those intersections between the dark blue and the orange, there is a water diversion, and water is entrained out of those streams and into the ditch systems. So a typical weir or diversion point would look like this, built maybe 1910, 1920. My coworkers are standing in the central part of the stream channel, which is dry, and 100% of the water at these sort of base flow conditions are diverted out into the ditch system. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of locations just like this in Hawaii with dewatered sections and clearly a serious barrier to upstream and downstream migration. But there's some opportunities here. The height of sugar production in terms of tonnage or whatever it's measured, bags of sugar, was in the late 70s, early 80s. And since then, there has been a really precipitous decline in sugar cultivation in Hawaii. In fact, within the last couple of years, the last sugar plantation is closed. And this is due to big economic considerations, globalization, a whole host of issues. But that has left the land largely vacant. There's some replacement agriculture being developed rather slowly, but it's also left a lot of questions with how to deal with this legacy of so much surface water infrastructure, and maybe there's some opportunities there. That's one thing that my work group has really been pursuing, and that is to look for reallocation, locations where there's reallocation of water and opportunities to get surface water and provide continuous flow within stream channels to repopulate these upstream areas that for decades and decades have been largely devoid of migratory life. The Hawaii Fish Habitat Partnership has been working with landowners, with irrigation system operators, with the resource agencies, NGOs, Native Hawaiian groups, and we're looking for areas where there's some level of agreement, where water can be, where diversion points can be modified or abandoned altogether to allow for fish passage. And this takes the shape of providing technical support, engineering, design features, looking for likely locations where you get the most bang for the buck. We've been able to garner some federal assistance to provide support, or at least matching support, to make these modifications. And we've had some successes. There's been a number of locations where there's some kind of human-built infrastructure. These photos on the right-hand side of the screen were actually an abandoned gauge, not a diversion structure. But there was a considerable amount of local interest. There were community groups, Cub Scouts, nurses groups, a whole bunch of folks that wanted to join in and provide the labor force to reduce the impacts of this particular structure on upstream, downstream migration. Really successful project. I would caution, though, that we don't have success across the board. There definitely are demands for water, both for domestic use and for alternative uses that are not sugar, golf courses, alternative agriculture, a whole host of other uses. And the biggest challenge, I think, would be where there are regulatory processes for reallocating the water, which can take a very long period of time. So a lot of that infrastructure might remain in place while sort of we wait for the resolution and can then start addressing how best to modify these structures for to support aquatic life. So I'd like to say aloha from Hawaii and mahalo. That's thank you. Especially thank you to the participants in the Hawaii Fish Habitat Partnership, my own agency, the Fish and Wildlife Service Fish Passage Program, which Eric McMillan described earlier. The fish passage funding and support has actually been fairly new for Hawaii. And I'd like to put out a big mahalo to the World Fish Migration Foundation. I know I'm the last speaker after a marathon effort and a lot of work by volunteers, staff all around the world. And I think maybe on behalf of all of the presenters, I'd like to say this has been a great experience, making us all feel like we're part of a truly global effort to recognize and take care of and conserve the aquatic species that we all care so much about. So I hope that was understandable, quick bounce right through some issues in Hawaii, and I'll turn it back over to Josh. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Gordon, that was great. Thank you so much. Big applause for everybody, of course. I think we have time for just one question, Molly, before we go into our summary.
Yeah, great. There have been a couple of questions circulating about essentially how do you prioritize which connectivity projects that you're working on given limited financial resources?
Yeah, we've gone through a fair amount of geospatial analysis. In fact, that was kind of the first technical task that we took on through the Hawaii Fish Habitat Partnerships. Once we were formed, we got some federal recognition, and as I mentioned, support like from the Fish Passage Program. We have worked with a number of leading geospatial analysts like Dana Infante, who was mentioned from Michigan State University, who was mentioned in one of the previous talks. And we have gone through a fish passage inventory And we do have a pretty good sense on where there are multiple points of diversion, where there's ample flow, and where, again, we could get the most bang for the buck. It's not easy, especially when you consider the regulatory issues and people, essentially, I don't want to say that people fighting over water is an ongoing story.
Good answer. Thank you so much. Others, please, if you have other questions, please put them in the question and answer over the coming 10 minutes of my wrap up and Ariane's closing. The other speakers can answer questions that are in there, including the dismissed questions in case they didn't get answered right away. So I want to thank everybody. This has been an incredible first, I will say, Global Swimway Marathon webinar. I want to thank all the presenters for putting together these really great presentations and everyone joining us who's taken the time to listen and learn, ask these great questions. These are great examples of how important it is that we really all learn and share and engage and excite other people about this really fascinating nexus between our planet's freshwater networks and the surrounding marine and terrestrial systems they connect to as well. So we started with our zooming way out with Steve Cook reporting on the status of fish populations and passage around North America. And clearly we've made a lot of bad mistakes over time and we're figuring out how some things work. But dam removal clearly is one of the best options, if not always possible. And I appreciate hearing from Carly Knight and Dennis Zimmerman on their experience working for Canada's Yukon First Nations with their kindred co-inhabitants. It's really, I think, illustrative of how we can bring communities together with this important banner of inclusive cultural and ecological restoration. So we deeply appreciate your work to create these connections between traditional and ecological systems. Next, it was kind of interesting to have the First Nation along with David Gould with this sort of first connection between European settlers and the indigenous Wampanoag in Plymouth that was celebrating the 400th actually commemoration of that landing of the Pilgrims in Plymouth. But really neat that after 400 years now, we're bringing something back to this community by restoring these sea-run fish. We went from there to looking at some of the really innovative work all around the US that Eric McMillan's been involved with, along with Gordon for this fish passage program. We looked at the really totally complex, enormous projects around Bonneville Dam with Ben Hausmann, looking at these really incremental improvements over time, really seeing a difference. It's not easy, it's not an easy system, and yet they are moving some truly iconic species upstream. I won't forget the height and the steepness of that sea lamprey ladder for a long time. And then really cool going from such a big system to talking about these headwaters and these rarities, these real jewels in the hotspot. One of the global hotspots for biodiversity in the southeastern US with Bernie Cahida's program there, looking at fish that sometimes just need small seeps and wetlands to go through life cycles, but their migration is much smaller, yet so much more important with the changing climate and the increasing stress on those streams. So lastly, our Global Swimway webinars has had 62 presentations over the last 24 hours. We followed the sun from New Zealand around the globe to hear from Gordon Smith, finishing off with Hawaii with those unique challenges to their river systems and the communities that surround them, and now are beginning to celebrate these connections too. So while people around the world have tended to forget about these rivers when they become degraded, I assume that's a way that we cope with loss, is just maybe we forget about it over time. But the fish are coming back, and they come back by the millions when we let them. So it's fascinating to me that over 2,350 people signed up for this webinar from over 100 countries around the world. So I'd say people are interested. We want our rivers back. And if you're in a system that's still intact, we want some kind of permanent protection for that now. So a basic premise for the World Fish Migration Foundation is that if we can develop and share this kind of excitement and enthusiasm, if we can develop and share good stories and accurate information, good science about free-flowing rivers, we can really help others appreciate it and become better advocates for rivers all around the world. More and more people can join this effort. And personally, I think that makes for happier people as well as happy fish. So if we grow this population of people that love rivers and raise awareness, we can influence decision makers, we can create new generations of citizens of planet Earth who really grow up thinking that free-flowing rivers are important and critical and work for them, and they become voters. And I think we all want this for the many denizens of these rivers, for happy fish and the other parts of the ecosystem, including happier, healthier human communities around them. So now I'd like to ask Arjan to come back to the Zoom presenter screen one last time, I think, although he did suggest maybe going around through Russia and going around the world again. But this is an incredible marathon, especially for you. So thank you so much for your efforts with this and for the Foundation's work overall. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I have to thank you, of course, Josh, not only for presenting, but you're also one of the founders of this foundation, and thereby for the work that we do now here. And you're still active, of course, with us as in advisory board and supporting us everywhere. So that's thank you, and thank Molly, and thank Hannah, all the speakers. Thanks a lot, and yeah, we can keep on thanking. But it's been very, very special. This session has been special, but also the whole 24 hours have been so special. It was absolutely fantastic. We will have a sort of a celebrating wrap up after this. Before we will go to that next phase, so to say. Thanks a lot, everybody, also on behalf of these beautiful creatures, the migratory fish. We are going to organize a huge Global Swimways conference in 2023. You are hereby invited already, and in the coming years, I think we will work towards that, finding more maybe virtual activities, but maybe also other activities, just to keep ourselves fresh and inspiring each other. And then this session will also be ending with a Eurovision song. For those who don't know yet, in the Netherlands you have a Eurovision song contest, and that is not happening this year because of the COVID situation, and therefore we are organizing a Eurovision contest. If you're a good singer, or if you're not a good singer and you still like singing, you can send in a song to us. We put it on our Eurovision website, and from Saturday people can vote for the best song. Obviously it has to, the theme is migratory fish, as you can understand. So now we're going to listen to one of them, and it's one of the last ones that is left that we have not heard yet. There I go. Although we just received a new one from New Zealand, by the way, I heard from Roxanne. So that's after the break. After in the final wrap up, we can listen to that one. So that's really, really nice. Here we go. Yeah, so this is a song that is from the United States. So I guess you will be recognizing it. And I hope we will join. So you can also, if you want to sing, you can sing with us. This field is your field. Thank you. And maybe see you.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want everybody to say, hooray, happy fish. 1, 2, 3. Let's hear it for World Fish Migration Day. Yeah. You know,
this eel is your eel. So that was fantastic. Did you also sing? Did I hear you, Josh? Oh, it's very, I mean, it's very much a song that you want to sing with it, right? So can we have all of us joining now? For participants, I want to warn, this is not a serious part anymore. We will just celebrate now because it's been so nice.
All right, go get a beer.
Yes, exactly. It's time to get a beer.
Guys.
And
12 o'clock.
it's 12 o'clock it has been, and yeah.
Yeah, I could have a beer for breakfast.
Yes. Ah, there you are. Okay, Lee, fantastic. It's really nice to see you in the beginning and the end. It's like making it round, right?
Yeah, although I slept a little in the middle.
Yeah.
Hey, I would like to say something very quickly, if it's possible. First of all, now that it's over, not yesterday, which I almost faint last night, but now that it's over, I want to thank Herman for this fantastic idea. It was his crazy idea as always, and I've never heard about a marathon like this, and I have been receiving many congratulations for the idea, so thank you, Herman. And not yesterday, I'm telling you, last night, I wanted to just strangle you, but now that it's over, I feel better. And then my second thank you, it's for Ian Harrison on behalf of all the team, because Ian Harrison from IUCN helped us so much finding many of the speakers, great speakers. There were some part of the world that we didn't have really good contacts, and he put so much time contacting them and explaining them. And so really, Ian Harrison, thank you so much for all your support. And then my last thank you is for all the team behind the screen, all the team behind, because there's a lot of people here, not only foundation people, and you know, people from Nature Conservancy, Josh, Molly, Hannah, people like Lee in Australia, Erin Laurie from California and Laos, from Fish Bio, and a bunch of people that put their time, you know, Luis Silva from Brazil. I don't know, I'm sure I'm missing a lot because we're more than 20. We're more than 20. Gigi from China. Thank you to all. I'm having a lot of fun tonight. Thank you. Thank you, team.
Yay. Yeah, and when we can keep on thanking everybody, especially also you, Pau. Pau made a sort of overview of the time zones in every country. It was getting so complex, and but you did it really amazingly well. But before we go thanking all the time, maybe it's nice just before that to ask a question to all of us. And I'm not sure if I can somehow get you all in the screen. That would, I do. Question: are we satisfied? And raise a hand if you're satisfied with the last 24 hours. All of us, yay! No, that's fantastic. Okay, that's really cool. Is there somebody who wants to share a highlight of the last 24 hours?
Woof.
Yeah.
Wow. I could say so many things. You know, I
don't
stop talking. For me, it was just to finally see like a big overview of rivers and fish around the world. I'm usually used to just seeing talks about European fish or North America or Canada or blah, blah, blah. But today, in almost 24 hours, I had a huge overview of all the rivers and fish of the planet, all connected. And it was so cool, you know, it really felt global. And I learned so much from rivers that I've never heard about, like Arabia, you know, that was so cool. Arabia, or I don't know, many. It was fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone else who wants to share a highlight?
I never heard about shrimp migration before. That was a new one.
Shrimp migration.
And I'm looking forward to snail migration, which is the next topic.
Herman, you need to start a snail migration day. It's the next.
Happy snail.
I already claimed the name.
No. Okay. Oh dear. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say my highlight is that you guys have been at this for 24 hours and you're still willing to have a conversation. That's impressive. You guys have a lot of energy.
Well, but it has been really, really good. I think it was, yeah, it's giving energy actually.
Well, I think what we also are seeing here is that the investment we made a couple of years ago, starting this and connecting to people who want to really do something, that is really starting to be rewarding, and really people see it, that we want to really make a change in the world, and everybody likes that, and make people happy, and so that's what we saw today, I guess. And I'm really proud that this actually, we can be happy that there is COVID. Sorry, but for this bad word choosing, but it got us together in a different way, and I think for the future, it can mean that these kind of webinars can also bring us together, and we don't have to go all traveling around the world all the time.
Yeah, that's yeah.
And so this kind of webinars connects us really well. That's my conclusion.
That was one of the big comments from Australia, Herman, was that a few of the participants were concerned they would never get approval for an international conference again because it went so well.
Oh, yeah.
That's a compliment.
That's good.
So that was a big compliment. But when at the end of our session, everyone was sending me messages about how much they enjoyed the talks, and then the proclaimers started singing "I will swim 500 miles," and my phone went into meltdown. Everyone thought that the Eurofishing entries at the end of the sessions were just fantastic. It was just something really different and out there, which people really enjoyed. So
yeah, that was nice.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Really good idea.
Yeah.
I think the highlight also is all the energy that was put to this. I mean, in all the presentations, it kinds of, I'm all wind up. I want to go out there and do some more work. I mean, yeah, so I think that's really important.
Conservation optimism. I really learned something from you. That's nice. Yeah.
It's a big movement. We should talk more about this because there's not many freshwater people talking about it.
Yeah. Okay, and then another question I thought of, what did we see in common? Is there like a common thing that we saw everywhere? Someone.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was impressed by is that every single project was a collaboration among people. It had to bring people together. So to get back to Herman's point, that what gives me so much hope and great feelings about this is that it brings people together. Like, we're trying to bring fish together and bring rivers, connect them back together. And it's really, all these projects involve lots of people, and getting them to sort of change their viewpoint, change the rubric of their mind. And it's really fascinating. It's powerful, and it is snowballing. I'm not sure if that translates to everybody's language, but it's really getting bigger, geometrically, and that's fantastic. Now we need to find a way to fund it, of course, but I think this is incredible. It's an incredible thing we have.
Yeah. And there's a strong point. It starts in New Zealand and it ends on Hawaii, and that's a really powerful message. And I'm really happy that Gordon is around. Gordon, where are you? He left, but
he's there. He's there.
No, he's there.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So
that was also amazing. This climbing fish, by the way. But yeah,
this New Zealand story, and then it ends on Hawaii, is a really powerful tool that connects us all together. So please stick around, Gordon, for the next years.
Yeah.
Stick around a lot of years, Gordon.
And what was something really different from between the different continents that we have seen? Is there something very different?
Of course. I don't want to talk anymore, but of course. Another one, please.
Someone who has not spoken yet.
Yeah.
I think something that was interesting to me was the difference in the amount that people knew about the rivers and the fish and what was going on, just because in some places it's been a priority for a while, and in some places it hasn't been, or it hasn't been like allowed to be a priority.
Right, yes. Others?
I love the indigenous component in different places.
Yes,
you know,
that was
New Zealand. It was so strong
yeah.
and powerful, and also with the First Nation in Yukon, that was great, sort of bookending.
I was also a bit surprised about South America, how different the situation is there. That Luis, that you expressed, and also Topis expressed. It was really interesting for me as well. It was really different.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just, yeah, like I said, when I was wrapping up the South American session, I think bringing everyone as we were all able to manage to bring from South America to present and give talks about the fish and fisheries in the different countries, it gave us that really strong message that fisheries in South America, as well, as I said, is a big thing. It's a massive component of people's livelihoods, and we constantly just focus on the fisheries productivity in Southeast Asia, for example, because that's immense. It's not comparable, but we do have a huge fisheries component there that we may lose. As I said, we still have a big opportunity there to save and preserve our freshwater fish species, but we need to act quick as well, because the changes are coming and we are losing various specific and unique freshwater components.
Yes.
And in my opinion as well, like one of the main highlights from South America was the talk that Claudio gave about Chile, which is constantly out of the globe in terms of fisheries discussions.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think exactly it. The livelihood component in our region is impressive. I mean, fishes are sometimes, I know it's like that in the Mekong also, but you know, sometimes it's the only source of animal protein for many people, the poorest people. And they don't have to go buy the fish. They just go to the river and catch a fish.
I think
you don't need a big fish like this. They eat the carassids and small fish. So it's a totally different thing.
Yeah, that's more or less recognizable with Asia, Julie, don't you think? That situation?
Yeah, no, very true. They eat anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I guess there's one thing to notice about the differences between the different regions was that, and I know this is especially true of Oceania, we're still in a building phase here, and some other parts of the world have moved to a removal phase, and they've recognized the benefits of removal, and that sort of shows the difficulty we have. Some countries are ready to start removing barriers, and some countries are still putting them in, and so we still have a lot of work to do.
Actually, I was also, I noticed in many continents, they're also talking about droughts. I mean, obviously in Oceania, that's a big thing, but also in other places, that's going to be a big issue as well, I think. Finding solutions for that.
Yeah, climate change in general, it's bringing so many different issues.
So this brings me to the next question. There's the last question. What's next? Good ideas. Having done this, what's next? Who wants to come with an idea?
Well, this kind of ties the two together, but one of the things that really struck me through many of the talks was this cultural significance that fish have with so many communities. And, you know, that's going away for some communities, like, and a whole a change in life, but also just the significance that they've had in religion and culture, and how that, you know, how can we emphasize that more? You know, there's, you know, we always talk about the ecosystem and biological connection, but it really struck me how many times it was talked about in the last 24 hours.
I fully agree. Yes.
Yeah, I agree on that, Julie. It's not only an ecological story. It's also a cultural story and a story of identity. It was really interesting. And I also liked the talk about the sandfishes. It was from Africa, I think. The one with the wine, Arjan.
Yeah.
And what I really liked about that talk was how they fully used modern technology, the storytelling technology, how they used virtual reality to show what can be done. So they could already show the future in a way. that these conservation efforts could mean for the physical surrounding. And I was really inspired by this. I thought, wow, this is maybe a really new topic in conservation, not only telling why it's important for ecological reasons, but also just showing how the future can look like. So I was really amazed by that talk.
Yeah, agree. Any other suggestions? No? Then I think that was a bridge. The wine was a bridge to the next things. Let's have a toast together. A toast on this 24 hours. And it's been a success. And thanks to all of you a lot that we made this together. Isn't it great? I'm really happy. Toast. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
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 Cheers. Salud.
Salud.
Salud. Prost. Oh, so nice. Prost. Okay, and then it's time for songs. There are 2 songs I'm going to play. We're not going to talk anymore, so it's goodbye to everybody. Hey, Yi. Hi, you're also here now. And the first one is, I will try to play the new one from New Zealand, which we got half an hour ago. And the second one, I have to look. I forgot which one. So first, let us try on the New Zealand one. One moment. Oh no. Oh. Sorry about this. Somebody can talk. I have to find something. Herman, can you?
Say something profound, Herman.
Can you say something wise or something? I mean, I'll be looking for this song.
Sorry, no, not at 1:30.
So how many people?
How
many of you were up for the whole thing? How many people were up for the whole thing? Raise your hands.
I think Arjan was up for the
Not
whole thing.
me.
I woke up at
Elon,
3 o'clock and
also.
then I said to myself, no, I have to sleep for another couple hours.
Oh, I thought you were awake for the whole thing also, no?
No, actually, I went to bed 1 hour before the webinar started. I finished working at 2.
Arjan is the hero.
Yeah, Arjan is the hero.
Arjan!
No. Team is the hero. Okay, I found it. So let me share screen and there we go. So this is, I think it's a really funny song. At least it seemed like that.
Thanks and aloha, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Hey, how do I play this?
Bye, Gordon.
Okay, goodbye.
I'm going to do some breeding, so I'm going to migrate, to migrate, to migrate, to migrate.
Fish, 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 fish. Fish, 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 fish. Fish, fish.
If you guys want to sing along, that's possible, eh? That's allowed.
My life's been very long, and I'm still going strong. It's time to make the journey.
Oh, but you feeling horny lately?
I'm gonna swim right down Pacific Ocean bound. Just got one chance to do it.
Let's go to Tonga.
I just want to migrate with you.
Oh, there we go.
I'm a longfin eel, it's what longfins do. Heading out to join the crew. I'm swimming out to the deep, deep blue.
I wanna go and do some breeding, so I'm going to migrate, to migrate, to migrate, to migrate. I wanna go and do some breeding, so I'm going to migrate, to migrate, to migrate, to migrate.
Thousands of miles away, this isn't just a game, an international race.
It's time to leave this place.
Not waiting anymore, it's time to head offshore to the longfin breeding ground.
Let's make some babies.
I just want to migrate with you. I'm a longfin eel, it's what longfins do. Hoping that we'll make it through in my life. It's my last thing to do.
I wanna go and do some breeding, so I'm going to migrate, to migrate, to migrate, marathon always this long?
Hoping that we'll make it through.
Want some lemon, slime and bitters? I wanna go and do some breathing, so I'm going to my graves, to my graves, to my graves, to my graves. I wanna go and do some breathing, so I'm going to my graves, to my graves, to my graves, to my graves. I wanna go and do some breathing, so I'm going to my graves, to my graves, to my graves, to my graves. I wanna go and do some breathing, so I'm going to my graves, to my graves, to my graves, to my graves. Oh.
Great.
Yay. We've got the next generation with us now. Good.
Jesus, it's getting really crazy.
God, that was a cool one. That was a cool one.
Hi, Masters Cook. Good to see you. And younger Silva. Welcome. Ariana, are you queuing up another one? Where'd he go?
He fell asleep.
Oh.
Okay, guys, I think we can close off. And I want to thank you all for joining and being here. And we're going to do this another time again in the future, in the near future, because this was really special. I think we should do it another time, but then other topics, new speakers, and
more lead time.
Yeah, and stay connected. Thank you very much, Arjan. You were gone? I think you fell asleep.
Yeah, I was talking about I was talking about trying to have a democratic vote for the last song, but nobody heard me, and you started talking, but I realized. Luckily, that happens on the last one, right? So yeah, so let's try to make a vote for the last song. That's the ending song, and you can choose between the shanty, between the African one about the polluted rivers, and about this eel is your eel, and the one from you, Herman, where you're standing with Chris Browser. Those four. So, shanty, who wants a shanty? Raise hands.
All the kids?
All the kids? 5. Okay, 5. Who wants all the kids? That's only one. Who wants the shanty? Who wants the African guy with the polluted rivers? That is, that's quite a lot. Oh, that's going to win. Then this eel is your eel. And Herman's one, out of politeness. Okay, this is clear, people. We go to, we go, one moment, sorry. We didn't listen to this guy yet, but I fully agree.
Okay.
We are now going to this fantastic gentleman with a really, really great song. And now it's really goodbye to everybody, because after this, it's going to be closing down.
Okay.
Hey,
okay.
bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, and we'll be in touch, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, na, 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 na. Hey, hey, hey. Tusipoziba ufa tutajenga ukuta. Tutunze mazingira na masandio sasa. Protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today. Ufa tutajenga ukuta. Tutunze mazingira na masandio sasa. We got to protect our environment.
The future generations will judge us by our actions today.
Rivers can't take it no more. Reason being in a chalk from all the plastic and waste material being disposed. Take a trip down Nairobi River. I promise there's nothing to smile about. All you will see is bumpers and condoms floating around, blocking the flow of water. Fish in a shindo tuli. Fanya nini to deserve this? Tourists wanna die. There's really nothing to see here. We are careless to not careless for the rivers that came off for us. Give us water plus. It's a natural resource to chunge our resources. The source God, He put us in charge. So let us take charge. Let us take charge.
Tusipoziba ufa tutajenga ukuta. Tutunze mazingira na masandi yo sasa. We have to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today. Ufa tutajenga ukuta. Tutunze mazingira na masandi yo sasa. We have to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today.
If we have clean rivers, then to corner clean lakes. When we have clean lakes, then we have more fish. Then to corner more food. Feeding up the nation, everything is all good. Namika Larry Dwayne, I will play my partner. He's the river to heal the scars. Kawangari Matai, I will die for this. Big up to Kilamse, anacheza kama yeye. Making sure innovations don't destroy our earth. All the slums going green, mazingira yetu haya ya wasafi. Haya ya wasafi, yeah.
Tusipoziba ufa tutajenga ukuta. Tutunze mazingira na masandi yo sasa. We have to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today. Ufa tutajenga ukuta. Tutunze mazingira na masandi yo sasa. We got to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today.
Na Wakenya mto zetu zinaumia. Takataka zimejaa inaumia. Uchafu na plastiki ndio samaki sahi. We really need to do something to change this. Take responsibility, be responsible, reduce, recycle. Stop turning our forest into dumping sites. It's a bad sight walai. Inafaa tuna act sahi. Otherwise future itakuwa messed up. Just imagine toi pako anauliza what's a river? Utajibu, utamwambia nini? Akiuliza Lake Victoria ilifanyika nini? Walai, it's crazy. We really need to change this.
We really need to change this now. I say we really need to change this now.